Hi, Mackenzie.
What up, yo?
Hello. We're doing this movie called The Holdovers today, and it's about a very eccentric, odd, I don't know what adjective you would use to describe Paul Giamatti's character in this, but just curious
Curmudgeon.
on your end. Say it curmudgeonly. Is
Curmudgeonly would
that's
be
a word?
mine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, on your end, weirdest or strangest teacher story or weirdest teacher you've ever had?
I am super glad that you asked this question because I have a great one that I sort of forget about, by the way, until this kind of thing comes up. But she
Mm-hmm.
was an actual crazy person. It was
Ooh.
my eighth grade science teacher, who shall not be named, but there are friends of mine on the pod who probably remember who this is. So she was just like emotionally unstable, truly, I believe. And so, eighth graders we were even in an honors class. This wasn't like a bunch of misfits who were, bad kids or whatever. It was pretty decent kids, other than the fact that they're graders and we're all brats then. But, we're just talking too much or being loud when we work on projects or maybe zoning out or whatever, the
As middle
typical,
schoolers do,
as middle
yes.
schoolers do, exactly. And she would just crack. And I mean, I
Mm.
remember one time she literally jumped on top of the table. You remember those like two-person lab tables?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, she jumped on top of the table and screamed at us all for not paying attention to her, and then jumped off and ran out of the classroom, like disappeared for the rest of the day. And this was literally a recurring event. It happened in my class only once, but it happened in her different periods, like multiple
Jeez.
times. And actually, her neighbor, other science teachers would have to tag team covering her class because she would just vanish and like, throw these fucking tantrums and leave. And she would also like play guitar at us, like to help us learn a concept, but it would get really weird and aggressive. And she had these really naturally.
Just imagining somebody aggressively playing a guitar at you. It's bringing me back to college when that one guy would bust out his acoustic to play Wonderwall. Just
A
like,
hundred
I'm
percent.
uncomfortable.
100%, but there's like a quiz involved. Imagine that, but with a quiz involved of like, you need to know the answer to this. And if you didn't, you were going to like break this emotionally unstable woman's heart. And she also had these very naturally buggy eyes that were truly terrifying and scary. And she would get in your face and like her eyes would bug out. And she would do that while she was playing guitar. It was that among a million other things. And I later found out, about which I was not surprised at all, that
She was
she,
homeless and was not supposed to be there at all.
no,
Okay.
she was in charge of our garden club, and she got fired for planting weed in the school garden.
Those seem like that seems like a paradox to me. I feel like
I
if you're a
know.
weed smoker,
You'd be
you would be more
chill.
mellow. Yeah, like you'd be one of those
No.
teachers.
Also, that's to be fair, like a total rumor that I heard, when I was 19 or something. So I haven't fact checked this
Mm-hmm.
to be fair. But the rumor was that that was why she got fired. And yeah, it doesn't really jive, but she did get fired. And again, if nothing else, it should be for leaving her classroom to everyone else's responsibility. Those poor, I
Yeah.
feel for her poor co-teachers. I'm sure you do too, having been a teacher. Like, can you imagine having to tag team
Yeah,
somebody's
I was a
class?
middle school teacher for 4.5 years, so I feel some of her stress. And there were times where I definitely wanted to storm out of my classroom, or I had to have
Yeah.
somebody step in. But like to do it that regularly, and to jump on a desk and scream at kids, and to force them to listen to Wonderwall so aggressively, I'm with you. I think she had it coming.
She did. She had it coming. What was yours? Who's your weirdo? I'm sure you can't top
So
that. I know.
I don't think I can top somebody who runs. Mine is more of like the least caring teacher of all time, and this was a
Mm,
college professor. It was a woman in probably her 60s, maybe 70s, who maybe shouldn't have been teaching anymore. Not to say, not being ageist, but just based on what I saw, did not feel like it felt like she was past where she should still be
past
in
her
a classroom.
prime.
But the way that we knew it was because, in college, you're going to this class I think it was twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. And
Hmm.
regardless, she did not ever remember any of the students' names. It's a classroom of 25 students, could not remember any of us from day to day. So every single time she would take a like roll call, and she would look around the room confused about who was who, could not remember a single person. My
God.
friend Tanya, whose full name is Tanya Lee, avid listener of the pod, thank you, Tanya.
Hey, Tanya.
She, her name is pushed together, so it's Tanya Lee. One
Yeah,
word. I believe she's going to kill me if I get that wrong, but
you're
it's
right.
pronounced Tanya
You
Lee.
are
Okay.
right.
And a lot of people are confused when they first see it of how you said. Understandable. I get it. I'm a
Yeah.
Lemar, and it's not spelled like the street in Austin, so I get the
I'm a
confusion of names.
Mackenzie Wayne, which is a first and two last names and a first name and all that. I totally get it. It's the worst.
So Tanya Lee, every single time in roll call, teacher gets up, looks at the sheet. Tanyeli,
Oh my God.
and Tanya's just frustrated every single time. And then to
poor
top that
Tanya.
off, not only was that happening, there was a student in the class who was wheelchair bound and could not raise his arms either. So quadriplegic.
Oh my God.
And had an assistant with him, like bring him in and out of the classroom every day. Teacher did not remember his name. So every single time, roll call, I forget his name, but buddy, if you're listening, I feel for you, because it was like Jonathan Michaels looks around the classroom. Jonathan Michaels. And it's like, Jonathan Michaels, stand up, please. It's like, what the hell are you doing?
God.
And eventually one of the other students would have to be like, ma'am, he's right here, and kind of
He's
point.
here. He can't raise his hand, you senile woman. Jesus.
So not a bad teacher, but definitely a lack of memory there, maybe a little lack of empathy of just, maybe I should at least learn this one kid's name.
Could you learn one? Oh my God.
Just one.
I don't know.
So you just gotta do one.
Roll call gives me such PTSD to begin with. Like, I feel like if I had to hear that every day, I would just be, you know what would happen to me? It would be Wayne every day. She would get to my name and she would go.
I didn't even think about that.
Every time. I don't know why. I'm like, why did you ignore the formatting of every single other name that has come prior to this name? I'm the literal last one. You've had a lot of practice.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see it and you, I don't know, short out and go Wayne every time. And I would always have to be like, Mackenzie, woman.
Aww.
Like, thanks so much. Yeah. I hate a roll call. This lady sounds terrible.
I didn't get too much of the roll call. I mean, Lemar isn't crazy. It's either Lemar or Lemar. I would get sometimes. I was more, my PTSD from elementary school comes from class photo day, because I was always the shortest one in my class. So I was always in the front row, like sitting. I was like me first, like front left, on my knees for every single class photo. So we should probably start the episode before I start crying.
I was going to say, this is already getting emotional. We haven't even started the app. Time to move on, for sure. Welcome back to We Drink and We Watch Things. I'm Mackenzie.
And I'm Paul Giamatti. Pleasure to be. No, it's Lemar still. Sorry, guys.
That is a literal lie. All right.
Wishful thinking.
Goals. # goals, right? Well, if you couldn't tell.
Or to have him on the pod, or for me to become him.
I don't know. I think either one sounds great. Like, if I'm a person, I'd be super proud to become Paul Giamatti. He's an incredibly talented guy.
Facts.
In case you hadn't picked it up, today we are talking about The Holdovers, which is actually a part of FanJan, but this is a 2.0 offering for the same reasons as A Knight's Tale that we won't relive because it's traumatic. But it also kind of nicely segues us into what is going to be our Oscars coverage in February. So this is an Oscar contender as well. So I'm super excited.
Yeah, and I think if I have the calendar right, this will be on January 31st. So it'll be the last episode of FanJan, but it's also leading into, it's perfect. It's almost like we planned it. Thank God for having to redo an entire episode.
I was going to say the universe collaborated to make us have to redo it, because they were like, you got the schedule wrong, to be honest. Let us help. So it's worked out nicely. Yeah. So we are talking Holdovers. We have done this before, so we are very prepared with regard to our beverages, which are, I'll let you take it away.
I mean, we kept it fairly simple, because if you've seen The Holdovers, which you should, we're going to get to ratings and stuff before we get to spoilers, but if you have seen the film, you will know that there is a lot of bourbon consumed by the adults in this film, and that's pretty much the only thing they seem to drink every day and every night is bourbon.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, you will find it looks to be a freezing ass cold environment, and they are pretty desperate to warm up, and the circumstances themselves, I think, lend themselves to bourbon, lend themselves to whiskey of some kind, for sure, which we will get into. But yeah, so we both did bourbon, and I did one. I'm really proud of mine, so I'm going to share really quickly. Mine has a rose petal ice mold, so it is beautiful. Yes, I took a photograph to share with you guys because I was very excited, so you will see it. But yeah, I love a good ice mold. Like, I have several options, but I just thought, Like it was a good feeling, warm feeling film, and it deserved a rose. So I put a rose in it.
Yeah.
Which bourbon did you choose?
So this is, I believe it's called Legend. It's a Kentucky bourbon, and this actually was gifted to me on my birthday by the aforementioned Tanya. So there you go.
Aw,
Mentioned
look at you.
twice in
This
one
is a
episode.
Tanya
Thank you, Tanya.
episode.
Yeah.
I was actually chatting with her this morning, so that is she's just the universe is giving us Tanya vibes today. I like it.
Yeah. Now, with that in mind, though, well, not Tanya, but the bourbon piece is that typically avid listeners will know I tend to do, sweet cocktails. So I'm doing bourbon straight today. So if you guys hear me coughing uncontrollably, that's every single time that's probably going to happen. I apologize.
I need y'all to understand that Lemar has the cocktail taste of a 19-year-old girl. So very much
I always
sweet.
have. Ever since I was a 19-year-old girl, I've just maintained that
just
taste in
committed to it.
cocktails. Yeah.
Well, I'm very much a bourbon person, which is a sweeter whiskey, to be fair. So it kind of makes sense that you would potentially like it. Generally speaking, bourbon's a little sweeter, but I have one that I would definitely recommend, I will say, because I don't think most people would expect you to like it. It's one of those like celebrity cocktail, liquor, whatever kind of brands. And a lot of those, I mean, not all, of course, but a lot of those I perceive to be kind of like shticks. They're money-making endeavors, and they are just capitalizing on their fame, and or they just weren't really involved, right? Like they just slapped their name on it.
Right.
This one is Brothers Bond Bourbon, which is actually developed by Ian Somerhalder and Paul Wesley, who are, if you don't know who they are, they
Vampire
did
Diaries?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
They did it was a famous series for a while, Vampire Diaries. And they drink bourbon in the show. That's like their shtick. They're brothers in the show, and they drink bourbon all the time. So I was especially reticent. I was like,
aren't they vampires in the show?
Yes.
Why are they drinking bourbon?
I don't know. This is a universe in which vampires can drink and eat and all the things, apparently. But all you ever see them do is drink bourbon. So that's really it. But
I guess that's fair. There's a funny video online by Max Landis, who's John Landis' son, and I think it's called is it The Death and Return of Superman? But he did like this YouTube, but all this to say that his father's John Landis, and at some point he says, my dad, when I was a kid, sat me down and said, hey, how do you kill a vampire? He says, oh, stake through the heart, garlic, or a cross, and he's throwing and he's like, no, you kill a vampire however the fuck you want, because vampires don't fucking exist. So you can make up rules for all these things. So
100%.
purists about zombies and werewolves, it's like, dude, they're fictional things. You can say whatever you want.
Yeah,
so.
There is no purism here. You know what I mean? It is every single one of these different vampire, and of which I have read many and seen many. I'm definitely a vampire girl. They all have different rules, and in this particular universe, they can drink bourbon specifically. But I thought it was going to be bad because I was like, okay, you guys just drink bourbon on the show, and you're just trying to make money off of that. But they really threw themselves into it, especially Ian Somerhalder. It's become his almost primary business, it seems, and it was a surprisingly good one. I held off buying it for a long time, and then I think I went into a Twins after they had done a big restocking, and it was on an end cap, and I was like, okay, whatever, I'll try it. Anyway, all that to say, this is one of the legit ones, I think. Like a George Clooney's Casamigos is really good. This is like that. It was really well developed. It's a really good bourbon. So if you haven't tried it, I would definitely recommend it.
Nice. We should do an episode where we pick 5 celebrity liquors and drink their liquors while we watch one of their movies.
Yes,
and, we could do a both series. The movie and
we can do a series. We need to talk Ocean's 11, so we could do a George Clooney up for that. Maybe while I'm in Vegas in March.
We should go shoot it right live at the Bellagio water fountains until they kick us out. Just set up our whole thing there.
I'm saying,
you have to leave.
Y'all, pod audience, fun fact, I just bought us portable mics, so we are ready to do this. I'm super excited. Yeah, I'll be there in March. Let's make a plan. Anyway, I love that idea. We could do this. All right. Well, all that to say, we spent 5 years talking about bourbon because clearly we care more about booze than we do the movie. So just kidding. This is a great movie. So, but this is our 2.0. So we're going to...
Forgot to cheers.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We got to cheers. All right. Well, cheers to our excellent taste in bourbon.
Cheers to that.
Yeah. Well, now we should actually talk about the movie. Listen, see, he still can't handle his liquor. Listen to this guy. He's still a 19-year-old girl.
Cosmo? Can I turn this into a cause? Can I get some cranberry juice? Okay. Sorry. Continue.
Now that we've gotten over Lamar's first choking moment of the ep, I'm sure there will be more. We do want to talk about this film again, as we said, but we want to give you the basics and we want to give you a quick spoiler-free section in case you haven't seen it yet and let you know like whether or not you should go see it. And then we'll dig into kind of the spoiler part of the ep and give you a little bit deeper dive into some of that. So I think we'll kick it off with some of the basics real quick for you. So first off, this is directed by Alexander Payne, who is well known for a couple of things. There's Nebraska I have seen, but there's a couple others I haven't seen, like Descendants.
Yeah, he's sort of all over the place. He does a lot of producing as well. But yeah, Descendants, neither of us has seen that, right?
I know, no, and I have mixed feelings about it. Like I heard mixed things about it, I guess is the crux of it. So I never really prioritized it, to be honest.
Yeah,
he also
but we
did
both seen,
Downsizing.
And I heard bad things about that one.
I saw that. I did not love it.
Okay.
I did not love
it.
Yeah. My do not recommend, probably, for sure.
Oh, that's a bummer. It had such a good cast, but
it did.
He also did Sideways, which is another Paul Giamatti, and we've both seen that, and that was I read the book first, and I thought the movie did it justice. Yeah.
I never read the book. That was one of the few that I didn't know was a book when I went and saw it, and then I found out after, and I always hate reading a book after seeing the movie. I feel like it ruins it.
Yeah, it takes some of the imagination out of it sometimes because you're just picturing what you saw in the film and the character rather than coming up with your own. I guess it could be bad either way. I know a lot of people got upset with specific movies when it's like, oh, that's not what I thought the character would look like in my head. And well, become a movie maker.
I think that's definitely true. I'm definitely that person who has read a book and hates the adaptation, but I just feel like that's a truer form of the art, because like that's the source material. So I generally would prefer to start that way. But yeah, I didn't see it, but that is a good movie. Another great Paul Giamatti showing, to your point. So he's done a few things. He's kind of all over the place. So
yeah, he's been around a minute. He did Election. That's probably the earliest one of his directorial that I've seen. And I just watched that for the first time actually recently. I didn't realize it was the same director.
Oh.
And that one was it's aged a little oddly, but it's still an interesting film. Yeah.
It is an interesting one. I definitely think that you should see it if you haven't. I think it has a sequel, but I can't remember if they've actually made the sequel or if it's like a book sequel, but it's like Tracy Flick Must Not Win or something like that. And I have been wondering if they had remade it. So that's a good follow-up item for me. I'm curious if they're going to do that one again. But that is a fun flick, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. What about on the writing side?
So writing side is David Hemmingson, and he seems to have done, like, you'll know his work, but I didn't know his name, that much. This is his first full-length feature film, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, mostly TV, right?
Yeah, mostly TV. He's done a few. He did Bones, which I think is like relatively well-known, was on TV for a while. He did The Catch, which I actually liked, but I don't know if it speaks to my taste because it did not go past a season. It literally lasted one season. It's kind of like a mystery con man thriller type of TV show. And I don't know if maybe that just doesn't translate to TV, but he did that and the writing was good. So it vibes. But then he was also an exec producer on How I Met Your Mother. So,
oh, okay.
Yeah. So which is what, like another Friends, it's a big long-term comedy series. So he's got a good mix there too. But
but first feature film, right?
First feature film. Yeah. Yeah. Not a ton of credits in general, but all TV. And I think that's why, right? Like he's working on one show for a while.
Yeah. I think that, you and I would agree that for his first time out, really, really good film.
Really good. Really good. And I think maybe, to that TV series point, like you really are, generally speaking, trying to write a character arc, but you're doing it over a really complicated format of multiple episodes, and especially multiple episodes that you don't know when they are going to end potentially, right? So it's very hard to write TV well, and clearly he's done it with some longevity. So I'm not super surprised that he was able to almost condense the format and get it all out in one story.
Yeah, it felt, and one of the things that I will say before we get to spoiler territory is that this one, the first 20 to 30 minutes, didn't really hook me. I didn't really see what the big deal was there because I think the writing almost felt too real, where it wasn't clever enough to really get me laughing. Like the
Mm.
kids in this talk like kids would actually talk. They're not super clever or witty.
How
It's just
dare
kind of,
they?
yeah, eye roll worthy at times of like, oh, these kids are annoying. Not
Yeah.
like the movie is bad, but it felt like a TV series where it's like you have to watch the pilot and parts of the first few episodes, right, to get a feel for the characters,
Yeah.
and then it starts to hit its stride. And then if you can nail that finale, and that's kind of what I would compare this film structure to, is the first
Yeah.
20 are going to be a little slow, but then once you know the characters, the back half is incredible.
Right. You get once you're invested for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of have to do, like you said, you kind of have to put in the work to get invested in those folks. So that makes sense. Yeah. Well, so all that to say, solid directorial writing part of the crew here. We also have our major cast is pretty small, actually. And
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting format. You get to concentrate on these characters really closely. So, of course, we have, as we said, Paul Giamatti, who plays
Mm-hmm.
Paul. So that was fun to me.
Just
They
keep
were
it
like, it's
simple.
just
He should
Paul.
just play Paul in every movie.
I wonder if he's just playing himself, but in teacher form. I don't know. Anyway, so it's a good showing for him. He does a great job, which we'll get into. But then we also have really just incredible performances across the board. But our dear divine Joy Randolph puts in an incredible showing as Mary, who at first you're not sure she's going to become a big part of the story, but she really does. She becomes, 1/3 of this little trio in a really meaningful way. So really cool.
Yeah, she's incredible. She is also Oscar nominated, I believe, and very deserving. I said this the first time we recorded, and I'll say it again. I think Paul's character is sort of the backbone of this story, but I think Mary's character is the heart of it, and where you really connect with that character throughout this film. She's great, and that performance is great.
Yeah, and that's such a great point. I mean, I think that's so true. He is carrying this story. He's your focal point for sure. But yeah, she absolutely is the beating heart. She brings a real sense of humanity to everyone involved in numerous ways, right? Like I think she's a very important mirror for everyone involved. We'll get into that, but she does a great job. And then our other part of this trio that we're focused on is Dominic Sessa, who plays Angus. And this is his first outing, period. Full stop. He
was like a theater student at the campus or something where they were sort of doing the auditions. And I believe the director said, hey, is there anybody else that we should audition to, sort of the theater teacher there? And he said, try this kid out. And he got the role and he kills it.
He does an incredible job. So clearly he's a good student because, he was in film school and then he went and immediately knocked it out of the park. So he does a great job. He's very young as well. And that reads and is important, I think, for this role in general. So
I think he has a bright career in front of him. And my thought was, that meme that's been going around of like, this person died in the same year that this person was born. So welcome back, so-and-so. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking that maybe all the roles that Ezra Miller will now be blackballed out of, this kid can take over. So it's like Ezra Miller's career died so that Dominic Sessa could live. And I'm fine with that.
It's so true and also a little bit sad because I remember, the days of Ezra Miller's potential was so strong and he was doing really well. But they're a very similar type. And then Ezra went a little crazy. So enter Dominic. Thank you.
We should whisper because he might hear this and come fight us.
Oh, that's true. But Dominic, could you, feel free to replace Ezra Miller in all the roles, but just like keep the crazy on the down low. Just a pro tip.
Or just don't have the crazy at all. Maybe just behave like a human being,
Just a human being. Oh, yeah. So I think that's the core cast. We have a couple, fun little almost cameos. Honestly, everything else is a little bit smaller, but generally a couple other actors in here that make appearances. We have Carrie Preston, who plays Miss Lydia, who's a real sweetheart throughout as well. And then we have another sweetheart that shows up, which is Naheem Garcia, who plays Danny. And becomes real relevant with Mary down the road as well. And then there's a bunch more, but they're just, again, they're almost blips, to be honest. The story is really around these three folks, ultimately, once you get into it.
Yeah. So the way we've done this before, y'all, you're probably familiar with this, but We're going to give you some high-level notes, no spoilers here, of just sort of our overall thoughts on the movie without giving anything away. We'll give you our rating at the end of that, and then we'll give you our usual warning of, hey, turn around, don't drown in spoilers, because really, you should go see this or make an effort. It's streaming on Peacock right now, so no excuse to not see it, unless you don't have Peacock, but I don't know. This isn't an ad for Peacock, but if you've got it, you can go watch it.
I was gonna say, I feel like Peacock has gotten in a lot of trouble with the Super Bowl, or not the Super Bowl, the playoffs. They like made people register for, and so probably a lot of you have Peacock now, and you didn't before.
Yeah, if there are football fans that cross over into our audience, they're going to be double pissed because we're like, you have to have Peacock again.
I know. I'm also a football fan, so I feel your pain, but also go watch it. So. But real quick, I will say, let's give you a super high level summary. Do not worry. It doesn't give anything away. But if you know nothing about this film, the general, very, very short plot is that a cranky history teacher, Paul Giamatti, at a remote prep school in New England is forced to remain on campus over the holidays with a troubled student who has no place to go. And they call those students, for context, the Holdovers. And that's how we kind of focus in on these three characters. So very, very high level summary of how this all comes about. And then also some awards shout outs, like we said at the top. This is segueing nicely into award season. Paul Giamatti actually won the Golden Globe for Best Actor for this role already. And Divine Joy Randolph won for Best Supporting. And they are nominated for Oscars as well.
In your history, in your experience, does Golden Globes win? Because I don't really watch award season. Do Golden Globes wins typically translate to Oscar wins, or is it sort of hit or miss?
It's very much hit or miss. It is a good indicator that they might also be nominated for some things. Like, it's not a far off indicator of its potential at the Academy Awards, but it is a really unrelated community. So if you don't know this about the Golden Globes, it is the Hollywood Foreign Press Association is the host and the community that votes on the Golden Globes. And so it's film and entertainment journalists, like that community. Okay. So it's not performers, directors, production designers. You know, the mix of the Academy voting body is people who are in the film industry, like in the thick of it, right? And
that's interesting.
The Hollywood Foreign Press is people who are reporting on it primarily, right? So it's a very different voting body. And what you'll see also is it's a bit more lighthearted. Like, the running joke is that award ceremony is like where you get drunk and have a party versus the Academy Awards is a very serious, obviously, award. It's taken very seriously in the community. And so, yeah, it's a very different vibe. And it's sometimes a really different winner or nominee, but there is definitely always some overlap. So, you know, again, go ahead.
What about the MTV Movie Awards? Who makes those choices? And do those usually overlap with the Academy Award winners?
Right. So that's usually done by people who don't know anything about music or movies, right? They just want to vote on things and get drunk. So, yeah.
That sounds like the most fun one of the bunch, honestly. It's like, best movie of the year, Fast X. We did it, guys. We did it.
We didn't see it, in case you were curious, but we've also never listened to a note of music either. So we really know what we're doing here, folks. Yeah. But it does, in this sense, the Golden Globes did translate. They did both get nominated for Golden Globes as well. But it also got nominated, we should note, or Academy Awards, I should say. They also got nominated for Best Picture, and then Best Original Screenplay, and which, again, shout out to the writing on this, and film editing as well. So solid chunk of Oscar noms for these guys as well, for sure. Cool. So yeah, with all of that, again, what's your takeaway? What's your takeaway spoiler-free review?
I think my biggest takeaways are around the style of the film. I remember when we first talked about doing this one, you had said, "Oh, it's like a new Christmas film. Like, it could end up being sort of like a Christmas classic," and it does feel. It's obviously a Christmas film. It takes place. The entire plot of the story is that this kid is being left alone on Christmas and having to spend his time with this mean hermit of a teacher, essentially. But stylistically, I found it interesting. The whole film looks like it was shot in the 1970s, and I believe it was all added in post. They didn't film on old equipment or use real film or anything like that. They added all these effects in post because they wanted it to feel like it was made in the time period where it takes place. I believe the story takes place in 1970. So visually it's really cool. There's even the opening credits are like 8 minutes long, which is a very old cinema thing to
Yeah.
do, of front loading the credits kind of.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it has the old MPAA ratings, and it felt like I was in another time, and in a way it kind of feels also a little bit timeless. And I guess maybe that's the intention of,
Yeah.
if I can make it feel like it's a 1970 movie already, it feels classic. I don't have to worry about making it look like 2023 and it looking
Right.
classic in 20 years, you know?
Yeah, I think they did a really good job of making it feel like it was of the time and
Mm-hmm.
just from the get-go. And I think even I don't know quite how to describe this, but even the people kind of look like they fit that time as well. And I feel
Yeah.
like if you watch some period pieces, sometimes you're like, we just look so different from that now. But you can see some pieces where you still resonate, like you still identify with that person, like it still looks like a relatively modern environment or a modern person or what have you, and they all just plug into this, I think, really appropriately. Paul
Yeah.
Giamatti absolutely looks like a 1970s prep school professor, which maybe that's just his whole vibe as a person.
Yeah. I'd agree with that. He kills it. I think that's my other takeaway for anyone who hasn't seen it, is the three main performances here are just incredible. I had never heard of two of the three, and it was my first experience. And like we said, everybody in here just kills it. And I think that's
Yeah.
sometimes those types of movies have that going for them, where if you have such a small cast and you have a chance to really get attached to them, you get a lot more invested in the outcomes for them individually, as opposed to a massive cast story. So
Yeah.
I think that one. And the last thing that I would say to sort of recommend this to folks is, I feel like if you're, I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, if you're a Wes Anderson fan of that style of just sort of like these sort of obscure moments in life, like it feels real, but it feels a little zany, but the dialogue is very just crisp and slow and it's drawn out, I think you would really enjoy this film. It's not going to be
Yeah.
as funny and off the walls as some Wes Anderson stuff, but I think if you
Yeah.
like the emotions that those films evoke, you'll get all that and more in this one.
Yeah, and I think a little bit unlike Wes Anderson, it feels really rooted in reality, in a place that
Yeah.
feels accessible, feels true and authentic. And this was filmed on location in New England, across a few places in Massachusetts, and that's where it's supposed to be, right? And so they really commit in a relatively harsh environment, right? Like it's cold as F in winter. And so I think it comes through as feeling like very much like a true story, and you can kind of insert yourself into that. And so, I love the ensemble of the cast. And so I think, I mean, I would just say high level, I agree with everything you just said. I would also say that there are some really poignant emotional moments in really different ways for each of these characters. They have
Yes.
radically different life stories that, again, we won't spoil right now, but they have radically different life stories, backgrounds, hopes, dreams, etc. But they all come together and complement one another's emotional growth in this vignette, in this small moment together, that they all do some really impressive growth in a short period of time
Yeah.
with very different circumstances. And I think just the kismet of that is kind of beautiful to see.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that, because my biggest takeaway is that this film is just a lesson in empathy, of realizing that you don't understand everything that somebody else is going through. So those people that, you bump into in a given day and they piss you off because of the way they're behaving, you
Right.
don't know what they're experiencing. And I'm not saying that makes them right in that situation, but a little empathy goes a long way. And I really
sure.
do like the way that I felt after watching this movie. It just left me with the warm fuzzies. I see how it could be a Christmas classic. I don't know that it's going to be like a watch every year, because it does pack an emotional punch, and it's
Yeah.
not going to be as lighthearted as some of our Christmas classics, but definitely worth at least one watch, and then once every couple years from here on out.
I think so too. And I will say, asterisk here, if you are like in your feels in the Christmas season, like I am in the Christmas season, this is one of those like that you will watch on repeat. There's another film that this reminds me of that's very bittersweet and emotional, The Family Stone. If you have seen that film, it's a very similar energy, and it is very much a Christmassy movie. And for some reason, I want to see that every season, even though it's like it hurts every time. And this is one of those that it doesn't hurt quite that bad, but there's definitely some bittersweetness. There's some hard topics, but I do think overall, yes, it can't be described without including heartwarming in it. So I think it's
Yeah.
definitely worth a watch.
So with all that in mind, what are you going to rate this sucker before we get into spoiler territory?
I'm trying to remember what my gut check was the first time, and I think it was 7. I think I was like a 7 out of 10 here. I think it was a
Okay.
very, very solid showing. 7.5, maybe in that
Okay.
range. Really, really good, positive film. But I agree with your high level of it starts a little slow. So I think that's probably
Yeah.
where I would land in the 7-ish range, you know?
Yeah, I think that about halfway in, once it had started picking up, I was in sort of the 7.5 range. Originally, I was in like the 6.5 of like, I'm not lying, guys, when I say I did not really get into the first 20 minutes. There's a moment that we'll talk about when the movie sort of turned for me, but the back half, and we'll get into the ending, which I love, and that bumped it up for me. So I would
Yeah.
say I'm more at like the 8 scale, and I think that in future rewatches, when I know what to expect after that first 20 or 30 minutes, I think I'll appreciate it a little more. But for now, I'll sit it at like an 8.
Yeah, I think it's a good range there. It's pretty accurate. So, all right. Well, all that to say, obviously, what we are suggesting is that you go see it or
Yes.
watch it on Peacock or what have you. But definitely give this one a watch. And you don't necessarily have to wait for next Christmas. I think it's a really heartwarming movie either way, for sure.
Yeah, I mean it's a winter movie as well. All the snow
For
in
sure.
this is real. There's no, special effects. All this snow is
Right.
actually in Boston. So if you're, even Austin got a little cold this winter. So if you're looking for something to watch while it's cold outside, there's worse choices than this.
Yeah. Get cozy and grab a bourbon and watch it.
Do a double feature with this and The Thing. And then give us an essay on comparing the two. Character development.
I was so cold watching both of these movies. Like, oh, I love it. All right, well, kids, turn around, don't drown. It's spoiler time. So we're gonna maybe hop around a little, but I'm gonna let Lemar lead us through this one. It's an emotional one. I feel like just warning y'all, like this is gonna be a little bit of an emotional conversation. Probably not as funny as some of the others we've covered, but it's worth
I think we caught that the first time that we recorded. We
know.
actually went back and tried to add jokes. We're like, let's
We
re-record this
literally
part.
did.
Because we're just like, this was a sad episode. Not to say that it's a completely miserable movie, but it just has these poignant moments that tug at your heartstrings. So
100%.
I don't know. I guess let's start at the beginning. I feel like that makes sense. We're not going to go through every element of the plot.
Sure.
But that first 30 minutes, like what specifically to you, I kind of delved into. Was there anything that caused you to kind of feel like, let's get the ball rolling here a little bit, or anything that stood out there?
I think it was just slow. I don't know that I had any specific thing that I was like, oh my God, I could just do without it. It wasn't like that. It was just like, okay, we could get going.
Yeah.
There's a lot of exposition here we're dealing with a curmudgeonly teacher who, of course, thinks that his pupils are brats who don't have any interest in learning and excellence and blah, blah, blah. And he is definitely a super intellectual guy who cares deeply about his subject matter. He's a history teacher. He thinks it's very important to learn about history for myriad reasons that we'll probably touch on later. But you get these snippets of him right away, just leaning into that, curmudgeonly teacher vibe. And you don't necessarily like him right away. You find him entertaining, I think. There's at least that. But
I know you did because you love $5 words, and that was my thought watch. I was like, Mackenzie's going to fucking love that this guy is using words like troglodytes and repistates or something like that. Like, just words that I hadn't even... What was it? Repistates? I can't read my... Reprobates. I couldn't even read my handwriting. That's how bad I am with these $5 words.
Oh, reprobate. That's right. He does say that. I love that. That's a good one. It's a good one. You're right.
But yeah, at the beginning, it felt almost over what you just said about it feels realistic. The beginning didn't. I was like, the character is so over the top mean to his students that it feels like a 80s like Breakfast Club type movie of like, why is this teacher being such a dick if we want this to feel grounded in reality?
I think that's hilarious to me because I have had this professor in college. Like I had this guy and maybe he was in, it really, I think of them as an amalgamation of two specific professors, which was one was a woman and one was a man, and one was and they were both in the English department. And so the $5 words really resonate because they definitely spoke this way. And the tweed and the elbow patches very much resonate because they gave off that vibe. But yeah, I had this like hard ass professor for sure. So it wasn't like, it does feel like a trope for sure. But I don't know. I could see him in my experience. And I was like, I know this guy. I feel like I know this guy for sure.
Okay, fine, Wayne.
Oh,
We'll
wow.
take your side.
Triggered.
So,
Triggered.
but so yeah, the first like third of the movie, or maybe fourth of the movie, it did move a little bit slow. I think it was this process of let's get down to business to defeat the Huns, of what we're actually going to be doing here with these three main characters. Because when all the kids were there, it went on a little long.
Yes.
Okay, there's these scenes of why is this character getting dialogue if they're only going to be in the movie for 3 minutes, then they disappear. There's the whole thing with they're trying to get the helicopter to come pick them up, and all the other kids leave with the other rich kid. They're all rich kids, I guess, but
that was slow because you're kind of waiting for, I think if you saw the trailer, you know that it's a much smaller group, right? So I remember thinking in the beginning, to your point, where there still are several holdover kids. Like there are, what, 6-ish maybe? So it's a handful of holdover kids. And you're kind of waiting for them to leave, I think, because you kind of know that you don't know under what circumstances. But I for sure was like, I know that they're not all supposed to be here the whole time, you know? And so they get this kind of outrageous situation where they all get to go skiing with this one guy, you know, kids' parents who are wealthy and invite them all to go skiing. But Dominic Sessna's character, Angus, can't go. They can't reach his parents. And once you finally get to that moment, you're like, okay, here it goes. Like, we're going to get into it now. And so, I do agree. I think there was a lot of that time where it felt slow, but I will say, I think it was important for you to see Dominic's character specifically for that period of his interaction with those other kids and what a kind person he is. And for his age, especially, he deals with another boy who's incredibly homesick. I believe he was Korean and can't go home. And he feels so lonely, and he's a little too old for this, but he wets the bed. And Angus is just, to your point, empathy in that moment is so kind, and he helps kind of take care of this kid. And they are starting to bond, I think, these kids in this situation. And then you really feel, I think, truly, really feel for Angus when he gets left there alone, and that gets ripped away as well. He not only doesn't get to spend his holidays with his family, with his mom and her new husband, and he's lonely and sad for all of these reasons, but then he also has these kids who he at least thought he would have some solidarity with get ripped away as well. And so, I think it gives you this moment of really feeling for Angus kind of throughout.
That's a solid call out, and something I hadn't even thought about was maybe the entire first, fourth of the film is really to develop Angus more than anybody else. Because I think the other two characters get there all of them develop more after it's becomes such a small group. But I forgot about the bedwetting scene, so that's a good call out there of probably what the purpose was. And I think it's we have to remember that this is a 17, 18-year-old kid getting left alone on the Christmas break, and that just
very purposefully, no less. No less. I think he even has a little bit different story than those other kids, right? Like they all have some physical limitation to having done this, or they made the choice themselves, right, for various reasons. So it's just not rooted in some of the same trauma. What is made clear, not 100% clear, but it is made clear that Angus has been left alone by choice, and it is seemingly because his mother has remarried and has a new husband with whom she's going to be spending her holidays. And they were supposed to be at St. Bart's, I believe it is. And
for like a honeymoon.
For like a honeymoon. But he was supposed to come as well. He's already at boarding school. He doesn't see these people all year, and he was supposed to be able to come. And she calls him, and you see the moment where she calls him and says, I need to have this time with him. I need to be with my husband, and you need to just be there. And you learn not why, but you learn that Angus's father is not available, and it is implied that he is probably dead and that she has had to move on. And so you just really feel for him that she is choosing her new husband over her son, who also can't be with his father. And I think that's a very different choice and a very different trauma than some of these other kids. And through it all, he's just trying to put on a brave face, and he chooses, instead of just wallowing, to try and take care of these other kids. And I don't know, I think it speaks a lot to his character for sure.
Agreed. Yeah, and him trying to take care of the other kids, but then, like you said, that gets snatched away from him, which leaves him. But on the plus side, he does get to rock the college queen size bed. You ever have one of those when you didn't have a roommate and you just push the mattresses together and it's like, now I got a queen, baby. You put those egg crates on top of it to soften the middle.
I just love that he's also like very much diagonal across it. You know what I mean? Because that is also the only way that that is actually comfortable. Because otherwise, you get in that little crack, like he said. I love that for him.
But I think that's where the movie turned for me, was when it's like, okay, here's what we're going to, because again, I hadn't seen the trailer. So now I understood what I was in for. And as they're getting just more and more miserable together in that sequence, but when they do the chase scene through the dormitories and through the campus, and Paul Giamatti's character is chasing him around and just saying like, stop, yes. You're gonna be he's levying these empty threats of, there's nobody here, what are you gonna do or say? But that scene of them chasing and then Angus eventually breaking his arm and then having to go to the hospital, that's when I think a switch turned for me and I was on board.
Yeah, I think that's like the pivotal moment in this film where it changes the trajectory of almost everything else. You know, one, to your point, it finally feels like it's taking off for sure from an action standpoint. But it also informs very much how their relationship evolves, because it is this very like empty threat on Paul Giamatti's part of he's screaming and yelling at him and chasing him through. He also sounds like he's going to have a heart attack, which like, girl, same. I would die if I had to run that much. So I totally get it. But he gets to him and it's this very like, it reminds me so much of the Finding Nemo moment where he's like going and swimming up to see the boat and his dad's like, don't you dare touch that boat. And it's butt, by the way, they say butt, but for clarity purposes. And he's like, I'm going to touch the butt. And he's like, don't you dare. And he just touches it, you know, but then he like runs, you know, swims back with this defiant look on his face. And I just feel like they are having that same moment. Don't you dare go in that gym. Don't you dare. Yeah. That is off limits. Yeah. And it's so funny because he's like, fuck you, I'm going. And then he goes and he does it. He immediately breaks his arm, like instantaneously. Like it could not have gone worse. And it's a rare moment of levity, I think, in this film, first of all. But it also forces them to bond. He has to take him to the fucking hospital. Like,
right. And that's when the comedy really started to land for me. I feel like that's when the script really tightens up to having the funniest characters at this point all interacting together. I love that moment where Paul says, you know, I wash my hands of this, metaphorically, of course. And Angus replies, of course, metaphorically. What did you think? You were going to fucking wash your hands? I liked that. And that was where I was like, okay, I'm on board. Let's go.
I love that you see... I don't want to say Angus is cracking, but he is in his fuck it era at this moment where he is so sad and angry at his circumstances. And the guy that he is stuck with, at least at this point, is the worst. And you can tell he's just like, I'm going to just fucking say what I want to say. Like, screw it. Which is a risky thing for him to do, because what gets weaved in here is that he is under 3 strikes, you're out threat, where he is going to have to go to military school if anything else goes wrong for him at any particular moment. And so for him to kind of brazenly be real attitudey to this guy is a real risk.
Yeah. And I think we forget sometimes that military school now means a different thing than military school in 1970 did. Like that, and that ties into another piece of the plot of that means you're probably going to war, you know, in 2 years' time. So
it's definitely a more brutal environment. You know what I mean? Like it is not military school now where, maybe you're running drills and you're still getting like an education as well. And maybe the education is actually the priority. It is very much like the drilling, the training, the, you know, intensity of that environment is quite a bit stronger, I think. And I mean, I'm not at military school now, but that's the assumption, right? Is like it has evolved somewhat. But back then it was a pretty brutal reality. And it also was kind of the community you were in wasn't great, right? In a lot of cases, this was the last stop for a lot of fuck ups.
Right.
So you weren't necessarily around the cream of the crop like you would be at a you know, nice refined boarding school. And so I think he has some real fear about that is legitimate. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that when I was, a teenager watching movies in the 90s and aughts, the military school seemed like a punchline in movies of you're going to get
Mm-hmm.
sent to military school. And it seemed like more like a disciplinary consequence,
Mm-hmm.
not literally,
It's
hey,
not
if you
about
can't
school.
make real school work, we're just going to send you to Vietnam and you're going to fight there.
No.
That is something that I think was lost on me the first time that we discussed this. But I want to use that as an opportunity to transition because that does tie into our third character, Mary, who we have not given enough love yet because she's
Oh my
awesome.
god, oh my god, oh my god. Can we fangirl over Mary? Because we love
Oh,
her.
absolutely, we
I
can.
think I think she is just, to your point, I loved the way you said it. She's the beating heart of this film, but she
Mm-hmm.
is also the first introduction for Paul specifically to empathy around not only Angus, but these students in general. And you see,
Right.
like, the first teaser of that is when the other kids are still here. And they have this moment of like camaraderie, comes and grabs a drink from her. And, they have a
Mm-hmm.
little chat. And he's bitching about the students and one in particular that he remembers. And she remembers him too. And she's like, oh, what a little shit. They have this bonding
Mm-hmm.
moment. But then he's like, oh, these kids, they're just so entitled and they have these cush lives and, goes off. And she's like, what makes you say that? Like, how do you know that? There's no
Right.
reason for you to know that that's a fact. Like, maybe they are privileged in this way that you can see externally, but you don't know anything about their life outside of here. And I think that cracks open very small at that moment the possibility for him to even try to look at these people differently, especially as it applies to Angus, because Angus is exactly that story on paper. He looks like this
Mm-hmm.
privileged kid, but he has this incredibly tumultuous home life for a number of reasons. And he has this really deep seated fear for this other reason that he is contending with. And you don't have any insight to this by just being closed off to the idea that this kid is just a spoiled brat.
Yeah, I think she brings some empathy to Paul about Angus
Mm-hmm.
and the other students. And it's interesting to me. I don't remember what order it came in, but the first sort of bit of humanity that we see from Paul is when the students that are still there at that point are sort of making fun of Mary in some way. And he defends her and
He
talks about
does.
how hard her life is. And he has that quote about life for most people is a henhouse ladder. It's short and full of shit.
Yeah.
And these, again, he's
Great
looking at
quote.
them as these privileged kids, silver spoon in their mouth. They're going to be fine no matter what happens. And it's interesting that he defends her when she's not in the room. And then she's the one that has to sort of open his eyes to, hey, it's not just the people that you think are
Yeah.
worse off than you that you need to have empathy for. You need to have empathy for everyone.
Well, and I think this is where you see that Paul probably doesn't see these kids as people, right? He
Mm-hmm.
sees them as kids versus he sees Mary as a full person. And so he can
Right.
have, I think, some empathy for her, at least a moderate amount, and consider her experience because it is so overtly tragic, right? She has lost her
Yeah.
son. And
Yeah.
everyone knows that. And her son went to school here, but he also went to Vietnam and he died in Vietnam. And she is grieving. She's actively grieving. It's very
Yeah.
clear that this is recent. This is a recent loss.
Mm-hmm.
And so he can have some humanity around her and her full personhood in her adult, very clear tragedy. But he can't seem to pull back the layers of other people's less obvious tragedies and life experiences, and especially kids, where he just thinks that they don't have a full life. They don't have anything to be upset about. They haven't been burned by everything. There is this deep rooted cynicism in him. And we
Mm-hmm.
find out that he has a lot of resentment for these kids because of his experience in this
Yeah.
world, where he has been accused and convicted, frankly, of, not in a court of law, but in a court of education, of cheating on something that has informed his ability to really fulfill his own education. And so I think he has a lot of resentment for the silver spoons and the wealthy people who
Yeah.
who were believed over him in a situation where he was not guilty. He had not cheated. Again,
Mm-hmm.
he cares deeply about his intelligence, his intellectualism, his, breadth of research and value and all
Yeah.
these things. And spoiler alert, he doesn't have a college degree
Mm-hmm.
because of this situation, because he was caught cheating, quote unquote, and it was that guy's word against his. And so he takes that out on these kids. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't argue that he doesn't. He takes that out on these kids. And Angus learns this much later as well, but it's a bonding moment for them then too. And I think it's
Mm-hmm.
because you start to understand Paul a little bit better. you start to understand why he is as curmudgeonly as he is, why he does throw out these $5 words and is aggressively overt in his intellectualism. It's because he's constantly trying to prove himself. He
Yeah.
is proving that he deserves to be there. And he's mad that he feels that way because he shouldn't even be in that position, right? And I think there's a lot of that he's a lot of that anger that he's directing at the kids, and he's directing at Angus at this kind of beginning stage.
Yeah. Well, you just covered in great depth all of Paul's sort of, I don't know if they're character flaws or just the chip on his shoulder of what motivates him and the way that he approaches it. I would like to talk about his eyes, please. So the lazy eye thing is very interesting to me. Apparently it wasn't even a part of the original script. Originally it started out as Paul Giamatti sort of pranking Dominic Sessa, who plays Angus, of just messing with him on set. And I think they would do scenes together, and maybe the first couple scenes they filmed together, he was doing this lazy eye, and it was confusing the kid because he's like, wait, it's part of the character. And I guess the director loved it so much that they decided to write it into the other scenes of the script. And the interesting thing to me is that no one wants to admit, like, how did we do this? Was it all practical? How much can Paul Giamatti control his eyes? Because there are folks that could, like a Skarsgård can do that. Was it added in post? And no one seems to want to give the secrets, which I find interesting because it's like, who's going to steal that? I don't think Marvel is going to be like, you know what? Let's give all our characters lazy eyes. We're going to steal this technology from the Holdovers. Why is it so secretive?
Okay, two things. One, I want to know how much time you spent Googling that. Like
at least 30 to 45 seconds. I know that.
You were like, I did a fucking deep dive.
I just think Google is faster than you think, Mackenzie. What's your Wi-Fi
did you go down a Wikipedia rabbit hole, of which I am very familiar. I do that on the reg, so I could see it happening. But no, two, it's got to be a contact, right? Like, it's got to just be a contact.
That's my theory, is they gave him a contact. And the other thing that's interesting about that, it changes sides throughout the film. It becomes a plot point of Dominic Sessa saying, hey, which one am I supposed to look at? It is this bonding moment between them. Not a lot of people are brave enough to ask Paul that question of, hey, I value this friendship, this relationship enough to have this awkward conversation, and let's get past it so that I can be a little more respectful to you in the future.
I think it's cute. Such a cute moment. Exactly. That's perfect word. I took the words out of my mouth. It's such a cute moment because it's, again, one of the other few moments of levity. And also it's, to your point, it's almost implied that Dominic is maybe the only person to have ever asked this, right?
Yeah.
And Paul gets to have this like moment of lightness and make it a joke, and then you find out which one it is, and it's such a.
We won't spoil that for you.
We won't. It's a big reveal, guys. It's such an intimate moment for them that it's subtle but also profound. I think a little bit, but. A couple other, I know we don't want to give you, the whole plot point by point anyway, but a couple other, I think, really profound moments or fun moments even for me where Mary has lost her son, obviously.
That was the fun moment for you?
No.
Jesus,
I said a couple
Mackenzie.
more. I'm going in order, okay? Calm down.
Probably the most fun scene in the film. Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to get to the fun ones. This is not the fun one. Important point of clarity. But Mary has lost her son, obviously, and she's got some healing to do on that. And one of the moments that's kind of bittersweet or what have you about that is they all get invited to a Christmas party. And it's this other teacher who's at this school. They happened to run into her at a diner running an errand, and they have this sweet moment where maybe Paul thinks she likes him, and he's nervous about going, and he thinks it's just a polite invite, what have you. Mary talks him into going and bringing Angus and letting them have a good time. So they all three go, and they also go with Danny, actually, who works at the school as well as a janitor. And so they go to this party, and they have this really sweet time. At least at first, it's a very sweet time, very sweet interaction. But there are these really painful moments throughout that party for these characters. And Paul is thinking that he likes this girl and she's so sweet to him. And to be honest, she's just being nice. There's nothing wrong with it. But you could see the threads of maybe something romantic. Hope. And you're, yes, exactly. And you're hoping for him as well. You're like, it's going to be this sweet thing for him. He comes out of his shell and he
Mm-hmm.
stops being a curmudgeon and whatever. You get invested in this very quickly. And only to find out a few minutes into the party, her
Right.
boyfriend or her husband or whoever it is, probably her boyfriend, comes in and kisses her
right on the mouth.
Kisses her right on the mouth, and it's like a heavy duty kiss.
That's not a brother. That's not a cousin. That's
brother.
Definitely something more. Unless if it was Game of Thrones, maybe, but this is not Game of Thrones to my knowledge. It's not part of the lore.
Right. It was a get a room kiss is the point. It was a get a room kiss, and it leaves nothing to the imagination for Paul, where he's like, oh, well, there goes that. And
yeah.
You just see this dejected moment for him, and it's so sad. But then you also have this moment of Mary where she's been drinking while she's there, not like probably not to excess, but we've seen drinking like at the school a little bit.
She's using that as a coping device. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a coping mechanism. She's probably had a couple before she got here. Mm-hmm. And then she's had a couple more, and she's at a Christmas party. It's her first Christmas without her son. And I think that hits her with a ton of bricks, and it makes her just have a little breakdown in the kitchen about it. And Danny, who likes her, is trying to be real sweet about it, but doesn't know how to deal with it. So he goes and gets Paul. And this is where you see Paul weirdly handle it pretty well and treat her very gently, but he sees how much pain she's in. And they are both having these very painful experiences at this fun Christmas party, while juxtaposed against this is Angus's adorable, like, make out with the one girl at the party moment where
they connected real quick. Like 2 minutes into the meeting, they weren't like, hey, where are you from? Or like, what do you have a job? It was like, what's your favorite Picasso? Like, what are we doing? These kids,
they're making out in 30 seconds.
They grow up so fast.
They do. And it's so cute for him, because you're like, this kid is having the worst fucking holiday, and he's stuck with these people, and he finally gets to this party, he meets this girl, it's really cute, he's making out, and he gets yanked out of that party too. He has to go home, doesn't get to have this experience, like, really play out, and you can hear him leaving and be like, okay, fine, we'll take Mary home, but like, I'm gonna come back. We're gonna come back.
And in that moment, I thought that was such a great indicator of Paul as a human being, of how he handled that. Of you can see that he's hurt. Like there is some pain there of, oh, I did have hopes about this, but he quickly just has this sort of somber, like, look on his face, not quite a smile, but just sort of like, well, okay, life goes on. And I think that's so telling of this character, who we find out, I wrote in my notes, is there a condition this guy doesn't have? Because he has the eye, and then he says, oh, I have this thing, and he also smells because of a condition. And he was not dealt a great hand for finding love. No. And it's easy to see, again, we're developing this empathy for him, of like, we see how he's become this, not quite a hermit, but just sort of like doesn't really care what the world thinks. So why am I going to put in an effort? And most people don't like me anyway because of my physical appearance. So him in that moment, I thought it was cool that they had it play out, where he, at the end, still is friends with this teacher who had been so kind to him. And it's not, he doesn't resent her. He understands they are adults and she has a boyfriend or whatever, like, move on, life goes on. But I also like that shortly after that, he has that line of, this is why I don't like parties.
I know.
He got Mary throwing up.
This is why. It's so sweet that he, beyond just it's he's kind of maybe resigned himself as a person to not being able to have a partner and all these other things that normal people have. And so you see that for him, and it feels sad. But I just have to shout out his character here for a number of reasons. And one I forgot to mention at the top is Mary is Black, and she is working in a predominantly white school in the 70s, right? She's not treated as an equal by most people here. And you never see him do that, right? He never treats her as less than. They have a what is a budding friendship from the get-go. And she is excluded from sitting at the table even, and getting an invite to the table on the regular. And he invites her to the lunch table, right? And he gets a lot of flack from the group there for doing that. And so I think that speaks very highly to his character is rooted in, he's not a misogynist, he's not a racist, and he's not, that doesn't manifest here with the teacher either. He really doesn't treat her as having wronged him. She just made a choice. She was just being nice. And for a woman, I can tell you that's rare, right? That being able to just have an interaction with a man that he expects something from it, and you don't give it to him, and it ends in a non-violent and non-verbally attacking way
And a
is
friendship
shockingly,
even.
and a friendship even is exceedingly rare. And
Yeah.
especially again at this time, it's even worse. And you
Hmm.
see him when he sees her next, just be kind to her. He's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I meant, I forgot my manners. I meant to
Hmm.
send you a note thanking you for including us," because he recognizes she was just being nice and she's still a fully formed good person. And I have no reason to get angry or be resentful to her. But he, of all people, is somebody you could see doing that. You could see him potentially just lashing out and being angry, and he doesn't. And I think it just again speaks to his character as a person even more so than you've seen so far to this point. But I think
Right.
before we go, we got to talk about the Angus reveal as well.
Yeah, I
Um,
think we have to touch on really briefly before we get to Boston and what happens, or in Boston proper, I guess is what I mean. I wanted to touch on their shitty Christmas the day after the Christmas party. They have the worst Christmas, but Paul is trying his best. But I love that the first thing that Mary says is that she's got a case of the cocktail flu. I think that is the classiest
yes.
new way to say you have a hangover. I'm sticking
I'm
with that
never
from
not
now on.
saying that. Yeah, I'm always going to say that now for sure.
I also like, I don't remember if this was Christmas Day or Christmas Eve, but another line of dialogue that I love is where Angus takes the Lord's name in vain. He says, Jesus Christ or something. And Mary says, it's Christmas. Like, you watch your mouth, don't blah, blah, blah. As soon as he leaves the room, her next line of dialogue, and this is a credit to the writer again, literally the next thing she says has 4 to 5 expletives in
Oh
one
yeah.
sentence. But it's like, oh, you can't take the Lord's name in vain, but you can say fuck, shit, bitch, all these other things.
Yeah, you can drop a motherfucker, no problem, but you definitely cannot say Jesus Christ, okay? Rein it in. So, no, she's so fun. She's so funny. She's such a fun character in general throughout, but I also love on their little perfunctory Christmas. He really does make a real effort.
He's
He goes and
trying.
like
He's
he
trying.
tries and gets this little tree, and I think it's so cute. It's like this very Charlie Brown Christmas tree moment, and Angus is a real brat about it. I wanted to smack Angus. I was like,
Yeah.
that is cute. That is a cute tree, and he's making an effort. He's really turned a corner, I think, again, in a short period of time. He has turned a corner and is making a real effort with these guys. But he gets them, we cannot forget, he gets them the
The
same
presents.
present.
It's
They
the
give
same
them this
book.
book. He gives them this,
Yeah.
history philosophy book. I think it's like Thoughts of Marcus Aurelius or something. And he gets it for both of them. And I
And they
love that
open them in front of each other.
in
So if
front of
you,
each
for some reason,
other.
haven't seen the movie and don't understand why this is funny, you see Angus open his gift and he's like, wow, thanks. And then he hands a gift to Mary. It's the same exact book. It's
And
brilliant.
Mary's like pleasantly surprised that she also got a gift, and she opens it and she's like, just her face when it's the same. And then I love that she calls him out. She's like, do you always get people the same gift? Really? And he's like, yeah, kind of. Like,
But then
and
she gets the bonus gift because then he hands her like a bottle
yes.
shaped, and she goes, okay, this
And
is
then
more
her
like
relief,
it.
she's like, okay, there it is. There it is. That's fine. Exactly. It's so fun. And it plays out later too, where you see that he has a box of these books. Like he wants everyone
Yeah.
to read this book. And so I love that though, because I am a nerd. I would definitely wouldn't do it in the same room, but
Mm-hmm.
I will like get people the same gift because I want everyone to experience it. So I
That's
get you,
fair,
Paul.
I
I see
think.
you. I
Yeah,
see
just
you.
maybe not at the same party.
Not at the
So
same party, not in
I
front of
think
each other.
I think now we can segue into what you wanted to talk about. They're heading to Boston. They drop Mary off, and we get a lot of
Mhm.
really really good character development with her sister, and the boys go off to Boston to spend some time there, and we get so much development from all 3 characters here before they get back to campus. So, what do you
Yeah.
want to touch on here?
I think there is a lot to unpack there. So, in the interest of time, we won't do it all. I would just say, yes, this is the pivotal emotional moment in the film as far as the Boston moment in general on the whole. And that's what you want to like really hone in on these characters and how they kind of come together. Mary has this very important growth experience about losing her son. That's key.
Yeah.
Paul and Angus bond and spend this important time together. That's also key. But what does happen is that Angus sneaks out and everything's like kind of going well and you think it's fine
Yeah.
and then he sort of sneaks out and you're not 100% sure why. You as the audience are like, where is he going? And it turns out that he wants to go see his father, which is why he's been so adamant throughout of trying to get to Boston over Christmas. It's
Mhm.
something he says to his mom very early on the phone of like, you promised we would go to Boston. And it's implied that he wants to see his grave. And
I like that misdirect a lot. I mean,
yes,
it's very sad misdirect.
very
but
well
in your
done.
head, you're assuming to what you said earlier, the way that they talk about him, you assume his father passed away.
Yeah, he's very past tense, he's almost
Mm-hmm.
forgotten. And so, and that is, it's important to note that that's the assumption Paul makes as well. So he catches him sneaking out and he doesn't understand why he's doing it. He's like, of course we could have gone to the cemetery. Why didn't you just ask?
Yeah.
And you see this moment of Angus being like, well, he's not in a cemetery. He doesn't say that
Right.
explicitly. It's just this transition to now you're in what maybe was called at that time as well a sanatorium, which is like
Yeah.
a place of, a mental health care facility, probably a facility for people with varying degrees of either violent mental health issues or just severe mental health issues. He has to be hospitalized is the problem here.
Yeah.
And so they kind of finagle it that he gets in, he gets to see his dad. He has this beautiful moment, you think, where he's like catching his dad. He's so excited to see him,
Yeah.
and it's
He
just,
wants to make him proud.
it's like, and we had this moment last time. It's so emotional, the way he wants to connect with his dad, and that this is the thing he's been wanting all Christmas. And he tells him all these things. He wants to make him proud. He's excited. And the first thing that happens is his dad doesn't get it, and he doesn't
Mm-hmm.
register anything he just said. And he immediately goes into, I think they're trying to put something in my food. And this is
Yeah.
when you realize that his dad is probably like a paranoid schizophrenic,
Yeah.
and he cannot connect with him anymore. And it's just devastating. It's truly
Yeah.
devastating. And it lands in a really unexpected way and very emotional way. And your heart breaks for both of them in that moment.
Yeah, and so to Mackenzie's point, guys, we got just as emotional about this moment last time. And if you're
Oh,
for some reason listening to this but haven't seen this movie, please go see it because we are still moved after discussing it twice. And that moment, yeah, hits really hard of just that turn of this very inspiring speech, and he's just trying to make his dad proud, and then his dad is not there anymore. It seems like, and I think that coupled with what we see Mary experience with her family, of she's had this box that they show throughout the film up in her closet, sort of tucked away, and she gets a little hazy-eyed every time she looks at it. She brings it with her, and then when she gets to her sister's house, you realize it's a box full of baby's clothes from her son. She had kept his baby clothes as sort of a memory, and she gifts them to her sister as clothing for her pregnancy. And they have this, it's something that I didn't mention the first time, but the moment where she and her sister are just sitting on the bed, like the twin size bed, talking to each other. And I don't even remember everything they discuss, but that just feels so real to me of what it
yeah.
feels like when I go visit my family. And it's like, you just have those moments where it's like, let's just shoot the shit on this bed and, bond a
Yeah.
little bit.
You just sit in a corner and chat and catch up. And it's especially momentous for her because you can tell she's kind of cut everyone off in her grief, and
Mm-hmm.
she's coming back to her family a little bit. And hopefully it's implied back to herself. And you want that for her. And so, yeah, it's a really beautiful moment. And I think that they pack at this time, they pack these equally emotional punches. But I will say, I think the Angus moment with his dad is the anchor, and it informs so much of what happens both before and after this. Of you understand his struggle with his mom, and it's almost unbelievable that she could choose to go on this honeymoon without him, and you understand his general anger and sadness about one not being included, but also like that he is not able to see his father and that that's not taken seriously. And then also this need that both Paul and Angus have to connect with someone. They both don't have a someone, right? Like they don't
Right.
have anybody. Paul doesn't get to have this opportunity with this teacher, and Angus doesn't have his family, and he doesn't have his father. And it informs this connection, very, very deep connection that they begin to have in a very short period of time, where Paul begins to understand who Angus really is, what his trauma really is. This is a next level of not only empathy, but real care and love for this kid,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
feels a responsibility for this kid now, where he realizes everything he's dealing with and that he doesn't have this connection in his life. And he starts to become, again, in a very truncated timetable, a father-like figure to this kid.
Yeah.
And he leans in for somebody who has never done this before. And this manifests in, he protects him when they get found out that they did this
Yep.
later. His parents are very upset. It's telling that this is the moment that his mom chooses to show up, and give a shit, is that, her ex-husband was involved, or not. I mean, seemingly ex. She's chosen to leave this man. She's chosen to move on, which I'm not even judging that. I'm judging her lack of care for her child in this
Yeah.
instance. But she is so upset that he chose to go see him and that this teacher helped. And you could see him debating whether or not to defend himself and to go hard at everyone in this room, the
Mm-hmm.
headmaster, the parents, the whatever, and, defend Angus's right to see his father, which he does touch on. He's like, I thought the kid should get to see his father, but he doesn't fight it out. He doesn't get combative the way that we've seen him do before. He resigns himself and says, yeah, it was my decision. It's my responsibility. And he falls on his sword for Angus.
And I think that's one of my favorite things. When I said during our spoiler free that sort of the last 20 minutes or so bumped this film up a point or like a half point or a point for me is because it doesn't play out as happily as you would expect it to. When we say, oh, this is a Christmas film, and but like halfway through, I knew how it was going to play out, right? And I was totally wrong. And I've never been happier to be totally wrong because I thought, oh, okay, so Paul's going to have this love story with this teacher that's giving him cookies in the beginning, and Angus is going to have this love story with this girl that he met, and Mary's going to have the love story with the janitor. Like, they're all going to find happiness at the end. And they do find happiness, but in each other and not with these external relationships, like almost like distractions. And we've already talked about how Paul does still have that new friendship, which he's grateful for. Mary has, shout out to Danny, who's trying his best this whole movie, the janitor. He at no point does he feel creepy or weird about him trying to pursue Mary. He seems very respectful.
He just likes her.
Yeah, he likes her, and he's trying to get a New Year's Eve kiss. I think he gets one on the cheek, but she's just clearly not into it, so that doesn't happen. We never see the girl from the party that Angus was into, but they have these beautiful goodbyes at the end, and it just shows the development. And I like that not only do we not get that quote-unquote happy ending for them of finding love, that wasn't the point of the story, right? It was them bonding with each other. I also like that it doesn't play out with him. I was expecting him to scold the mom and her new husband and really give them the business on, you left your kid here, this is your fault. And he doesn't. He has that line you said, I thought the boy should be able to see his father on Christmas. So he says it without saying it. He says, fuck you for leaving him here by himself, but he doesn't directly say it. And I thought that was brilliant.
And it showed real restraint, right? Like he could have definitely given them what for, but maybe it speaks to his growth and his empathy as well, where he's going, maybe this woman has a reason emotionally why this is very triggering for her and hard for her to do and allow her son to see her, her former husband. And I think he's realizing, which he didn't before, is that he could just unleash on people and assume that he knew everything about the situation. And I think he's learned in a short period of time that he doesn't. And it's easy for us to judge this woman and judge her choices. But I think you see this restraint for a reason. He's realized, I have feelings about this. I'm not okay with this. Yeah. But there's maybe more to the story, and I'm just going to leave it at that. And he loses his job. And it actually feels like a moment of hope for him, because now he's going to not be tethered to trying to keep this job so hard and prove his intellectualism every day. He's going to maybe work on the outlines of that book that he talked about, and he's going to travel, hopefully. And you have a real sense of heartbreak for him and Angus having to leave one another, but you have a real sense of hope, I think, for both of them. And I think that's where it ends on that very heartwarming moment.
Yeah, the warm fuzzies that I mentioned earlier, I think that you just summarized them perfectly. Of even for Mary's character, we don't end with her being completely over or recovering from the loss of her son. It's more just this hope of like, hey, life is going to go on. We don't really have a choice in that. And 100%. You never completely, I think, recover from the loss of a loved one, especially something like that.
Especially your child,
you. Yeah, and so hope, I think, is the key takeaway here at the end. And I know you wanted, last time we talked about the final sort of scene of him driving off.
Listen, we know this episode was heavy, so I just have to leave you with a gem that was one of my favorites, at least, which was if you didn't notice, the president or the headmaster or whomever, whatever, the douche canoe who runs the school is all you need to know. The board gave him a Christmas gift of Louis the 13th, which, if you don't know, is a bougie AF cognac. It's a very pricey cognac. I don't remember.
When you say pricey, like, do you know about how much this thing is for a bottle?
Like $1,000 a bottle-ish is probably a good ballpark, to be honest. I haven't looked it up in a while, so it is a lot. And the point is, like, a shot of it at a restaurant, right, is $300, $400. You know what I mean? And so it's this very expensive Louis the 13th. I tried to get Skylar to get us some for the ep. I did not succeed in my efforts. They have it at the restaurant. It was too pricey. I didn't win.
Do they make it in those little airplane bottles? Can we
They-
get it for like a few bucks maybe in a
They
plastic
do
bottle?
not make it, but they should. That is a missed opportunity. But who's buying a $300 little airport bottle? I guess maybe that's the question. The real question.
I can't believe they would even let you shoot it if it's that
Well, you
expensive.
sip it, to be fair, but
Okay,
it's a
like a
serving,
okay.
I should say. You know, it's
Got it,
it's in
got
those
it.
little cutesy, cognac glasses,
Mhm.
right? So, anyway, point is, it's super fucking expensive, and I love that Paul's like last fuck you to this school and to this guy who was actually a student while he was a teacher at one point. Is he goes and he literally takes the fucking Louis the 13th off of his desk before he leaves.
Mhm.
He's driving out of the school with his little U-Haul of stuff, and he's driving also, and grabs it and takes a swig of it, and you're like, motherfucker, what? And then he swishes it around in his mouth like mouthwash and spits it out. Just spits it out onto the ground, and it was just such a hilarious fuck you to me. And I think it landed so much more to me because you know how much that is, and he just spits it out.
I think that I've said this before to friends of mine is drinking and driving, like drinking then driving under the influence is terrible and you could get somebody killed. Drinking while driving is awesome. So I love that Paul is just like, I'm going to have this. I assume he pulled over 5 minutes later, but he didn't swallow it anyway. But I'm wondering if that's some metaphorical thing of him sort of leaving this bougie lifestyle of these rich kids behind him, of this is just not for me, you know?
I 100% think it is. It's him literally spitting it out and going, I don't need to prove myself to this community, to this guy, to these standards. I am worthy and intelligent and capable without any of your bullshit, you know? And I just think it's a great moment of freedom for him that I think he hasn't had since he lost his opportunity to finish at Harvard. And so it's a really cool moment. And again, it leaves you with hope for all three of them, with whom you've become very close and very invested. So definitely heartwarming.
This one is fun. We should do this a third time because it's fun to ride this emotional wave of like, I can be sad for a little while and like well up, but then I get this really warm, fuzzy, hopeful feeling at the end. But after discussing it a second time, you still sitting at about, what'd you say, 7.5?
Yeah, I think as we talked about it again, I think I did this last time too. I don't remember, but I think I landed at like a 7.5 or maybe even an 8. Yeah. It as you go through it again, you remember how much it hit, you know, and how many layers there are. We, as you know, we talked about some of the same things, but we also talked about a bunch of new things this time. Yeah. So it's one you can watch and unpack, I think, over and over, and that's very telling in and of itself.
I totally agree. Yeah, I think that I'm still sitting at an 8, but I think on a rewatch, I could see myself liking this more over the years and just the emotional experience you can get from a film like this. I have one other nerdy thing to call out before we wrap up, just because it didn't fit anywhere else in our discussion, but to my sort of like film major buddies or anybody that's super into that nerdy component of it, I love that none of this was shot on a soundstage at all. This entire film is shot practically in parts of Boston. So looking at the vehicles and the buildings and like I said, the snow is all real. So again, it just makes this feel grounded in reality. And again, it's 1970. So the fact that they got all of this to look legitimate, despite not faking any of it in that way was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very well shot. I was reading about their location manager, actually. Wow, deep cut. She is from Massachusetts. And so she, I think, was really good at finding these just authentic local places that felt real to her probably and felt like home to her. And then they shoot there and it all comes together because, they are all real environments. And I think it speaks to somebody who treats this area, this region like home. And they found these great spots that really came through.
Yeah, plus you get the candlepin bowling, which is a Boston thing, I believe. I don't know if it was invented there or if it came from Europe and then made its way specifically to Boston, but that's a specific Boston thing. And I also love that apparently the liquor store clerk in the single scene where we're hearing about the Harvard story is a real guy. He works at that liquor store. I'm wondering if he's still there today, if you can go in and say hi, but I love that he just has that line of like, here you go, killer, where Paul's talked about running his former friend over.
And it's so New England. It's such a New Englander
Yeah.
vibe. It
Oh,
totally
you murdered
jives.
somebody? No biggie. Yeah.
Yeah, I just love that it totally jives that this would be a real reaction from somebody here. And yeah, it lands really well. I love it. So
Awesome, dude. Well, this
well,
was a great emotional
it
conversation. And
was.
I think we're going to have another interesting one next week. We're in the
Yeah.
middle of Oscar season, and we did a
Right.
vote on our Insta. We'll be running another one this week, but you want to tell them
Hmm.
what we're covering next week?
Yeah, so in case you hadn't heard yet, February is going to be award season month. So we're going to do Academy Awards, Oscars specifically during that month, and we're going to hone in on 4 categories. So just the top 4, which are Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Picture, and Best Direction. So we're starting off the month with the Best Actress nom, which is for Emma Stone in Poor
Mhm.
Things. And this is a fascinating one. So definitely come back for that. And we'll be running a poll as well for the other categories. So keep an eye out for that on our Instagram. But yeah, come back next week for Poor Things. For now,
Faux
though,
show.
go have a drink and watch a thing.
And
Cheers.
don't drive drunk.
And
Cheers.
don't drive drunk, but drive and drink. Yeah. Cheers.
Drive while drinking.
While
Bye.
drinking.